Hey, everybody, welcome back to another commission podcast. This time we have Grant stepping up to the plate, and we'll see if he knocks it out of the park. He wanted us to watch the World of Tomorrow trilogy. And you hear trilogy and you think, oh my God, that's like 12 hours of content. We're talking JRRT levels of trilogy. But no, these are actually animated films in a very loose and sketchy style. The first one's about 15 minutes long, and in fact, I would encourage everybody. You're gonna spend $3 a lot crazier in your lifetime than going onto Don Hertzfeldt's Vimeo site and plunking down $3 to rent the first installment. 15 minutes of your life and $3, and you either know you're going to watch the other two or not at the end of that experience. The next one's like 20 minutes, and I think the last one's 30. So it's all about an hour, all said and done. This is not the first time that I'd seen his work, Jim. I was introduced to Don Hertzfeldt back when we covered season 3 of Fargo. And there was a really surreal animated segment in the middle of that was narrated by Carrie Coon. And a lot of people said it reminded them of Don Hertzfeldt, even though it wasn't actually done by him. And that sent me down a spiral where I just consumed literally everything I could get my hands on from him, and had a really good time doing it. Were you ever familiar with this guy's work or had seen anything?
I don't think so. Unless it's unbeknownst to me, no.
Having seen it, how would you describe his work on this World of Tomorrow trilogy, which includes, I guess, these are films written, directed, animated, almost everything except for like the voice work is done by Don Hertzfeldt. It includes the original World of Tomorrow released in 2015, World of Tomorrow episode 2, The Burden of Other People's Thoughts in 2017, and then the World of Tomorrow episode 3, The Absent Destinations of David Prime. In 2020, it just came out last year. How would you describe this work for people who are curious about it?
Crudely animated modern day fables. Is that pretty accurate?
Fables in the sense that they contain like talking foxes and dragons, or
more that they're, I don't know. They have a lesson that they're trying to impart to you. And his dwellings on how to live life well, I guess, is what you could say about these three short films.
Yeah. I was trying to coach you into talking about the time travel and cloning aspect.
Oh yeah, no, they're sci-fi for sure.
Yeah, they're very hard sci-fi. The conceit is a third or fourth generation clone from this girl, Emily, I think is her name's future, comes back to visit her in the past to, I don't know, impart her some wisdom. There's just this time traveling tourism thing, and like going back and experiencing memories like in a pure form is like prized, and this time traveler's back from the future and just having this conversation with this uncomprehending 5-year-old girl. Mm-hmm. And it sounds ridiculous, and it kind of is, but it also gives the film this kind of really poignancy.
That's where I get the fable part from. But I think, like, as far as the sci-fi goes, there are the concepts here are broad. Like there's cloning, there's time travel, there's memory transferal, there's virtual reality, there's
transhumanism.
Transhumanism, stasis, robots, all that stuff is contained within this hour-long trifecta.
Yeah, it stars Julia Pott, which is the British-sounding older Emily clone, and Winona May, which is Don Hertzfeldt's real-life niece. And he got the idea to do something with her and just kind of followed her around and surreptitiously record their conversation while she was drawing pictures and playing and walking outside and whatnot. And then this reminds me a lot of what was that Dinosaur Cop? No, Axe Cop. where you had you remember that thing where like he had this guy, he got his younger brother to just tell him a story, and he just committed to animating whatever it was, and he ended up with Axe Cop and Dinosaur Cop and all this other crazy stuff that was compelling and wild. And you get a similar energy here where Don's got his niece and she's just talking about all this crazy stuff that kids do, and he's weaving it into the narrative. And it makes it like, that's the other thing is like, this sounds really deep, and it is. And there's like pretty profound insights into the human condition, but it's also really funny. If you want to see like Don Hertzfeldt just being very funny in a surreal and weird and wonderful way, check out his work, Rejected, which is the conceit of that is he's trying to draw animated commercials for different products, and he is kind of like a anti-commercial kind of guy, and he can't quite bring himself to do it, and the rejected commercials just spiral increasingly out of control. And what was innovative about Don Hertzfeldt is that he does these intensely traditional animated techniques. Like, he essentially just draws on paper, takes pictures of it with a 35 millimeter camera, stitches them into sequence. He does weird things with the medium itself, like, different charcoal and pencil techniques and different textures of paper, sometimes even animated, like wrinkling up the paper to make things appear to like ripple and move. Setting the paper on fire, I think, in a couple of instances. It's really bravura stuff. I hope I'm saying that word right. This is the World of Tomorrow's first foray into digital animation. A lot of it's still traditionally hand drawn, but you can obviously see that he's doing, I mean, the animation equivalent of like synthesizer effects. It's all like flashes of color and geometric fractal shapes and things like that. I like I said, I think this stuff is really profound. I'm not sure, like, at what point should we just stop try to describe people like what it is, and when should we just start talking about it? Are we about done with the?
I mean, if we want to entice people further, it was nominated for an Academy Award in 2016 for Best Animated Short Film. Didn't win. I don't know. I don't watch many short films, so I don't.
Probably something Pixar won because, of course.
No, I don't think so. It's a movie called Bear Story. Or a short film called Bear Story. I don't know. Pato Escala and Gabriel Osorio were the creators of that. So, yeah, it didn't win, but it was nominated, which is a pretty high praise in itself. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think like I largely agree with what he has to say about A Life Well Lived, and the setting for me was kind of perfect. This sci-fi kind of virtual reality that he puts everything in. I enjoyed that.
Well, I'm gonna get the Grant's credit real quick, and then I want to talk about the availability of these films, which is something of a discussion itself, and then we can start talking about them. So first, this was commissioned by Grant, and it's been a bit of a process because we weren't, I was familiar with the first 15-minute film, but I hadn't seen any of the others. I wasn't even aware that he had gone on to make this into a trilogy, and it was one of those things where it's like, on the one hand, Jim likes time travel and cloning and the implications of it. But on the other hand, he has like a limit for absurdist, surrealist shit. And like, I wasn't sure if he would be into the project. So we had to go back and forth to try to get the availability of this film is a little bit of an issue. But anyway, Grant says, I'm having a bit of writer's block, so I'll forgo the feedback and just say thanks so much for you and Jim and for all the pods and creating the Bald Move community. You're very welcome. And thank you for your support in the commission of this podcast. If you want to watch World of Tomorrow, there's only one way to watch it currently that I'm aware of. And that is, and it's like, even if you resort to piracy and whatnot. And I don't know if that's a big testament for his respect or his, I don't know, hotline to the fucking Swedish pirate party or what. But it's on his Vimeo website. And I thought that was really weird. Like, why wouldn't you have it on Amazon? Why is it? And this guy is just a really uncompromising purist when it comes to animation. And he could not guarantee the clarity of his animations on these other platforms. Like Vimeo, like I guess worked with him on the compression algorithms. He says he's like 99% happy with it, but even still there's some artifacting in certain scenes where there's a lot of color and like haze. And he does not consider it still the legitimate version of his film. There is a Blu-ray release that's coming in like 2 months.
Okay.
That is going to be the first time outside of a theater projection that he has considered it to be his authentic work.
I think Don Hertzfeldt might be the only person who gives a shit about this to this degree. Like,
well, like a lot of purists,
you don't need 90
right?
megabits a second to render the animation that he did. I get it, but also...
I mean, this is like Bill Watterson with Calvin and Hobbes. Like most people want a Calvin and Hobbes T-shirt. He's paralyzed with fear of what it would do to his creation if he commercializes it. You know, like
sure,
a
I
lot
can understand
of
that.
yeah, this is shade. I mean, I've read a lot of interviews with Don Hertzfeldt, and he did a lot of Reddit AMA. I don't think he's like as big as an asshole as what's the V for Vendetta guy. It's not Grant Morrison. It's not Neil Gaiman. It's Alan Moore. He's not, but you know, it feels like around animation and around these art forms that are appearing to be like going the way of the dodo, you know, like traditional hand animated stuff, like, you know, serious graphic novels. There seems to be like a protection of the medium itself baked into the people who have spent enough time to make it great. He also makes a point. I think the reason he feels this way too is that there aren't a lot of places for animators to do independent, interesting work. Like animated shorts outside of like the award circuit is almost unheard of, and you make almost no money. Like the pressure to just work for a ketchup company, you know, animate Jolly Green Giant, work for Disney on keyframe animations to get paid and yet that work is so all consuming that. So he's a big advocate for building platforms where animators can like get paid for their work and own it and be. So I mean, I get it. Like it makes a lot of sense. I feel like there's a certain amount of tilting at windmills here, but they're probably righteous windmills to tilt at, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem. Like I don't seek out short films. I don't really watch things outside of like informational videos on YouTube at that like time scale. I would much rather sit down and watch at least a half an hour episode of television.
It's not clear to me why that is, but it seems like it's a universal preference. Like Quibi.
I was wondering what his thoughts on Quibi would be, because they were trying to do something around shorter content and it just didn't work at all. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like it's like if you're an animator, like a feature film is like almost too daunting in terms of a task, and like and also it's like doesn't allow you the expressionism of, you know, just releasing a 5-minute, 10-minute, whatever. But anyway, World of Tomorrow is a milestone for him because it's the first work where he starts dipping his toes in the digital medium. And man, to talk about this film, I think these films are very funny. But they're very funny in like the margins. Like, for example, you know, third generation clone Emily comes to visit 5-year-old Emily for the first time and just lays in this monotone British voice all this facts on this 5-year-old who just sitting there kind of looking at her blinking. And she's like, I'm a third generation clone. And I was, you know, you have a decent amount of money, so there's very little degradation. And then like as she's saying that, her like eye starts twitching uncontrollably. There's like all this kind of like, and it reminds me of kind of like, you know, when we get to this level of stuff, that's exactly what it's going to be like.
Yeah.
There's going to be the first generation shit that's terrible, and your grandpa just doesn't work right. You got to reboot him all the time. But by the time it rolls around for his son, it's going to be fine. But, you know, they weren't rich, so they had to decide whether they had the deluxe package and he got to keep his childhood memories, or it's like I feel like some of the worst stuff in Altered Carbon is what is the black humor in this World of Tomorrow.
Yeah, we were talking about it right after I had watched it, and I asked you if Don Hertzfeldt was British because of the sense of humor in this. It's very dry. It's very, it's got like that dry absurdist feel to it. Like the grandpa you mentioned in passing is stuck into a cube, and they read letters that he has been transmitting out of there, and there's time dilation too, so it's like 4 years of letters. She picks a sampling of them,
which
and reads
was in the
them.
first day, it was in the first day of real time.
Right, and when she reads them, they're, oh God, oh the horror, oh the humanity, please, oh God, help. Just like he's stuck in
by
this
the time you get
cube.
the first one, it's been 4 years of this. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And they have no intention of letting him out, right? It's just like, that's Grandpa.
Yeah. And they do. So I guess one thing is to like go through these things like vignette by vignette and just talk about them. Unless you just want to.
Yeah, that's going to take a while, but okay.
Well, I don't know. Maybe we'll see. Because some of them might like, you have the introduction where we already talked about that. And she talks about the nature of space time and time travel. And there's an existence of this outer net, which is just like the internet, except for people put their consciousness into,
Yeah, it's a VR.
And
kind of thing.
There's this one that becomes later important later, that one of the most popular features is this clone exhibit where they've created a brainless clone, and it's a baby that stands in this tube, and people watch it in real time age.
Named David.
Then named David, and he lives a human lifetime just standing in that cube. Again, he has no brain. And people have formed these intense, it's like the Truman Project, only like if that happened with the bodies exhibit. And then he dies and he's quietly removed. That's just like a little bizarre thing, but he takes that plot thread and starts adding on to it, because you find out that the clone of Emily has fallen in love with one of David's other clones, because that's the other thing in this society. You can not only clone yourself to continue your consciousness, you can also clone yourself to maximize your free time, increase your revenue, have backup clones. Yeah. It's very Altered Carbon in like a stickman animation style. And it's like there's also this like really interesting things where Emily's like the jobs that she's had, like where she manages robots on the moon. And she programs them to be motivated by religious fanaticism to follow the light, and then later she abandons them. And I don't know, what's that? A commentary on God himself? I suppose.
Yeah. And they continue. The key thing there is they continue to follow the light, right? Even after their God is gone and has just kind of left them behind as failed creations or whatever. They continue on their quest.
And it doesn't like have a sampling of like the poetry that these robots have created, because they're sentient, and it's like, move robot move, but why? It's very it's like, also I feel like this is hugely influential to Rick and Morty, because I know I've heard Dan talk about Don a few times on the podcast, and like some of this stuff is like, this is like just shades of the butter robot, the butter butler from Rick and Morty. But there's also this, her being sad, but being proud of her sadness, because it means that I am more like the sadder you are, the more alive you are. And you can be proud of your sadness because it's proof of your being still alive.
Yeah. Like she fell in love with a rock, one of these robots, I think. And then eventually David, and all of them, she either left because she had a longing for something else, or they died, like David specifically. Just kind of dies one day. And then she's left to, kind of dwell on that sadness and understand, I think, the fable here that he's getting at, the thing that he wants to impart is that all of these experiences are making Emily what she is. And they're making her a more complete person, like someone who is able to, it's essentially what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? That message.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it makes a certain amount of sense. I can get down with that.
Yeah. There's because I guess the thing that's inciting this incident in the future is there's an asteroid coming that's going to destroy the Earth.
Right.
And people like the wealthy are fleeing in these time stasis cubes. There's others that are trying
clones underground.
Right, to survive the apocalypse and then come back. There's others that are trying to escape using low budget time travel, and they make this point of like this is something that I always wonder about in time travel, because you know, when you're traveling through time, you're going backwards in time, but like you also have to triangulate your place in space as well, because the Earth is moving around the sun is moving around the Milky Way is moving around the universe. And in this, it's like they had this hilarious scene of like these people that are experiencing the mishaps of low budget time travel, where they're just materializing in space.
Yeah.
Or inside rocks or stuff, and just like dying. And like there's meteor showers of corpses around Earth where they got it close, but not quite. And they're just steadily raining down.
And there's a scene where young Emily Prime is out, you know, marveling at the stars in the sky and counting them. And the clone Emily says, "Oh, those are actually the bodies of the people who've time traveled and are hanging out there in space."
Yeah. And, she also says something else profound, that now is the envy of all the dead.
Yeah.
Like the present. And this is something that like came out in like the interviews I saw of Hertzfeldt, as he always says that like his main inspiration is this like crushing sense of nostalgia that he feels like. And he's like, it's not even nostalgia for like my youth, or it's more of just like the realization of these precious moments are constantly slipping through your fingers.
Sure.
And you rarely get to stop and appreciate them, because you're thinking about like, how am I going to pay my bill? I'm worried that my parents are going to die. I'm worried that this is going to happen to me. Like that you are so consumed with, you know, like both your your mortal nature and your need to continue your existence, that you don't get to appreciate it. And that's like what I feel like is a big motivating factor in a lot of his works.
Yeah, I wonder if he ever synthesizes the idea of like the balance between those two things, because like you can't just go, you know, what he says, do not lose time on daily trivialities, do not dwell on petty detail. Like that's fine, but surviving is not petty detail, right? Like putting food on the table and having a roof over your head, those things are not petty details. How do you live that balanced life? Because it's one thing to just say live for the moment, right? And you'll be happy. Well, if that's to the detriment of your future, then you won't be happy, actually.
And this is something that we've been struggling with since like the invention of agriculture. You know, we used to have these carefree, like most, you know, this goes back to like paleontology and archaeo history, is that like most people think that like average caveman put in like 10, 15 hours a week, and that put clothes on his body, or roof over his head, and meat in his belly. And we gave all that up to have average long, like essentially just to have average long lifespans, you know, like to ever, like all of civilization has been to maximize how long we live and how many of us can live to old age.
Well, and some nebulous concept of progress, right? Like,
yeah,
some
but that's
productive.
The progress.
Yeah, like what are we working toward, I guess, is the question.
Yeah.
Because
no longer can some bigger caveman come and steal my shit, or no longer do I have to live in fear of a saber-toothed tiger coming in the middle of the night.
Right.
But to get that, I have to work 40 to 70 to 80 hours a week. And if I don't, I'll be homeless and I'll starve, or I'll die of some easily treated disease. It's something, you know, like all that kind of stuff. So
I mean, I question that idea that we have to do that in order to preserve what we've built. It seems like we're striving towards something, but we don't really know what that something is. It's just more.
Yeah.
Right?
It feels like that, like if we step back, what we're really trying to do is build up so much surplus that we will never want, and we'll never have bad times,
which is impossible.
And if we ever, I mean, you can start to squint and like, oh, fusion and automation, and like maybe we'll get there, but like it's like been like a 10,000 year experiment of, can we just pile enough stuff that nothing bad can ever happen to us?
Right.
And if we ever get to that stage, then we can just stop. But we're caught on that treadmill.
We are.
Yeah. So.
And that's where it comes back around to like, are these trivialities, or are these like necessities at this point, to where you have to spend 80 hours a week at least concerned about how you're putting food on the table, or you're going to be left for dead, essentially.
I see a lot of people like, are you familiar with the Return the Monkey meme?
No.
it's essentially people longing for like that caveman existence of like,
Okay.
and this is kind
It's
of
Joe
like how
Robinette.
my fascination, the bushcraft stuff, the idea that like anyone could go out in a sufficiently large wilderness and without paying taxes, without like, you could just survive, you could just subside off the land.
Yeah.
The problem is that not everyone can do that. I don't think it's literally possible for 8 billion people on this planet to just dispersed camp. Like there's just too many of us. We would strip the land like so many locusts. Like we have to mechanize and industrialize farming to feed us in the concentrations we're at.
Sure.
So that's like, yeah, the return to monkeys bullshit. But like, I understand the impulse. I understand the impulse behind it. And like you, I reject that we have to live in a society like this way. I just don't know how the hell. It's one of the things I've been trying to figure out these last 10 years is how the hell do we get out of this? But
yeah, it just seems like the people who are leading the charge won't take their foot off the gas. And we're screaming, hey, we're running out of gas. Now let's keep going.
But
this
I wonder
is like
if,
that episode of
individually...
Seinfeld where Kramer test drives the car and he essentially takes the car salesman hostage, and then there's some like what's the Stockholm syndrome where the guy suddenly like turns a corner and he's like, yeah, let's push this thing, baby, let's go all the way.
Right.
That's the ride I feel like I'm on right now.
Yeah, because that's the other thought is like anyone could go out and live in the woods. Is like it's shocking how little you need to live. And you used to have a little bit of this aesthetic too, like where you were just like, all I need is this desk and this mattress, and like that was freeing, right? Like the whole reason were like trying to pare down is like the liberty of just like I can move anytime I want.
Yeah,
I can stop working for long periods of time because I don't require that much. Like. It is like we are a little complicit, right? Because like we clearly don't need all of this shit. I gesture wildly at all this plastic shit behind me, all this consumeristic shit.
Sure,
but you too. But we buy into it, even though at the end, like the key philosophy is now is the end of all the dead.
Yeah. And if I ever needed to feel like Don Hertzfeldt feels probably all the time, I just look behind me at the nostalgia, the physical nostalgia on my shelf. And I get where he's coming from.
And they said there's also another profound thing I wrote down. It's like we will share the same fate as all of humanity, dying horribly.
Yeah.
And I was like, like even people that die in their sleep, like they didn't die well. People were wailing at their funerals, like they left people bereft. They're depriving the world of their light and their experiences. Like it's both terrifying, but yet oddly comforting that like this is the like, if there's one thing that's human, this goes back to George Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien. If there's one thing is to be human, it is that we all die. Like that's literally perhaps the only universal thing shared by men, women, those in between, any socioeconomic status, no matter where you live on the earth. No matter how upwards you climb or how far you fell, we all end up worm food at the end. That's a lot to pack into just 15 fucking minutes of screen time, right?
It really is, yeah. And then it's trying to... Is it trying to say something beyond even like the idea that we could live forever? Is it trying to say that there is an immutable quality to death? Because in this scenario, they've created clones to try and prolong their lives. They've created this outer net where they can upload consciousness and memories, and conceivably, if you're loaded into a computer, you could potentially, if you're turned into digital information, potentially live forever. Barring some kind of meteor strike that just destroys everything on the planet. And you can diversify humanity onto other planets, like into other star systems, into other galaxies potentially eventually. Like, is he trying to say something with the comet, the rocket or whatever, the comet that's going to destroy the world, that's not possible, or we're like, this is a fool's errand to try it?
Yeah, like it goes back to like now is the envy of the dead. Like, I guess on an intellectual level, I'd like to think that generations from now, humans' existence is secure. But what does that mean to me, a mortal middle-aged man?
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to get somewhere between 0 and 50 more years of this, and then my struggle is done. And, you know, whether some plague takes us out, or an asteroid, or the fucking sun explodes in 5 billion years, like it literally, sure, in a way ceases. Now, the thing that's really tantalizing, though, is like, what if we get to some kind of altered carbon state where we do have a fraction or all of humanity that could exist forever?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that would fundamentally change how we view like life on this planet and each other? Or do you think it would just exacerbate all the existing tendencies?
I think there would be some kind of fundamental shift. Although, you know, would that affect daily life? Societally, there would be a shift, certainly. Individually, I don't know, because I don't think about, like, when I think about my friends, I don't think, oh, they're going to die one day. I don't live in the constant fear of death. And I'm sure there are some people who do.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not one of them. So probably for some people, yeah, it would change things.
It reminds me of that, like, you know, the proverb that like wise men build shade underneath the trees that they'll never, or no, they plant trees under which shade they'll not enjoy. But like that completely changes the script, that like you're continually invested. There is no like ticket out. I guess you could self-delete, self-terminate or whatever. But like, like you have to, you know, 500 years from now, your bullshit is going to hang around and you got to see to it.
I mean, maybe that would just be the shift, right? Is like suicide becomes completely accepted. Like, oh, that person just, you know, they were done with their existence and decided to delete themselves.
I don't know. It's like, the other thing is like, I often wonder, the other thing I was thinking about when I was watching these films is like, some of this stuff seems horrific, you know, like the clone tubes and the budget time travel and all that kind of stuff. But like, I often wonder, like, if you could go back and like explain to a Paleolithic person, like, look, I know it's bad when your kids die and when you get sick and suddenly, or you get ripped apart by a saber-toothed tiger or whatever. Would you trade all that for 60 hours a week in a 8x8 box, staring at a smaller glowing box? And in return for that, you will have safety and security and food in your belly. And, you know, sometimes you'll, for no fault of your own, that'll get upheaval and that rug will be pulled out from underneath you. It's like, would they see that as like just horrifying, like almost a Matrix-like experience? Like, you spend 8 to 12 hours of your day in a tube in return for like 4 to 6 hours of freedom and then sleep. Like, I feel like they would. Like, it's one of those things where like we get so caught up in our now experience that we can't but look at horror at what potentially progress would be, or like regression. Yeah,
I mean, I don't know what the grandpa is experiencing in that clone box, but it sounds like hell to me.
It's bad.
Yeah, I don't.
Right?
I don't
or maybe it's lost in
that.
translation. It's like a Hellraiser thing where it's like it's a sublime bliss, but like he has no words to explain it. Yeah, but it seems bad. It seems bad from our perspective. It seems like death would be preferable. Yeah. Do you want to move on to part 2?
Yeah. I mean, I probably have a lot more to say about all of this, but yes. Otherwise, we'll be here all day.
Yeah. I'm not trying to hustle us along. I just at the end of my talking points.
Well, I think there's definitely something to like Emily being a child, because you've got this clone with all this experience coming back and telling her, the child who can't even comprehend what she's saying really, but is living in the state that clone Emily wishes she could live in, right? That carefree.
Yeah, children are in the moment.
Exactly. Yeah, she comes back when clone Emily sends her back from the future to Emily Prime's present. She's just dancing and singing like nothing had happened, right? She hadn't just experienced the end of civilization, humanity. And yeah, she's living in that moment carefree. So
do you think it's an intrinsic property? Like, why are children like that? Are children like that because we give them the freedom to be like that they just really don't have to worry about consequences? Are they like that because
it's part of it?
My experience of being a child was I was a fully formed consciousness that just kind of caught up to my life as I was already living it somewhere between 3 and 5 years old. So it's like you literally don't have a concept of your personal past. So you don't remember like, oh God, man, I shit my pants for the first year to 2 years and I sucked on my mom's tit. And what am I even? Like, you're free from all those regrets and you don't have worries for the future? Or do you think it's like a brain developmental or a little bit of column A and column V?
Oh, yeah, there's probably some developmental thing with your brain still forming all its pathways and all that. But yeah, I think like they try and get at that in this first episode, right? With Emily falling in love with a rock and a robot and David, and then realizing that her sadness is part of what makes her her. Children just don't have that, right? They've not had the experiences to reflect on, to understand what existence even is. And so they're just doing it instead of thinking about it.
It might, I don't know, like if it seems like when people are amnesiac, it's like trauma, it's traumatizing to them. So like maybe there is something structural there because like, you know, if you can't remember who you are, then it seems like you'd be returned to the childhood state. But I don't know, maybe it's being hooked up to machines and at a hospital and everybody else making it weird for you. It's not like, oh, hey, welcome back to the, you know, like, you know, no one says in a kid, no one's like grabs a kid by their shoulders and being like, do you remember who you were? You know, like,
well, they're aware that they don't have
around
those memories, right? They're aware that like I'm a certain age and I should have these memories and yet I don't have these memories. And then they start thinking about that. Whereas I don't think kids think about, oh boy, I don't have any memories from before this time. Like you said, they're just now coming into a life that they don't even know that they're living.
This brings us there's one other. I love the visual gag at the end where clone Emily is going to send her back into time. And, you know, they've already introduced the idea of budget time travel. And like she glitches into like this frozen wasteland tundra, like a 5-year-old. And when I first watched this movie, I'm like, holy shit, is Don just going to leave this little girl to die here? And like, it's like a long time, like 15, 20 seconds. And then the world glitches and she's back in her bedroom.
Yeah.
And Emily just starts immediately singing, oh, what a happy day it is, like completely oblivious to her brush with death and the inevitable destruction of mankind's future. Which brings us to the burden of other people's thoughts. This is very germane to our conversation about what makes children, you know, childlike.
Yeah.
And she invites, this is the time where I think a faulty clone of Emily like goes back to visit Emily Prime and invite her into her subconscious outer space. And you see like what a dark, you know, like Emily is all sunshine and light. And yet this older malfunctioning clone Emily says her subconscious is a dark place. I've suffered much. There's glimmers of hope in this like muck, like they're walking through this Dagobah and like Emily picks them up and these bright shims. She's like, oh no, put those down. Those are the glimmers of hope that have subsided beneath the bog of realism.
Yeah, this one is probably the darkest of the three. I think.
Yeah, it's there. It's a running between 2 and 3 for sure.
But this is like the part where, you know, Emily as a being realizes that her dreams are dying or more likely dead. She's been through enough experiences where her time is running short. And she no longer has the runway ahead of her to accomplish any of the things that she wished she should have or could have accomplished, like being a dancer or playing the piano or, you know, there's some other implied stuff like maybe a violin or something or a trumpet. I don't know. Whatever she was.
Yeah, she still has because she goes and it's like, I play piano perfectly. And she goes to play piano. It's just terrible.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, at least I'm still a concert violinist, which I think sets up a joke in episode 3 about what that means in this society.
Oh, yeah. I understood it as like, that's another false memory she has. And that's the joke. Like,
I see.
Because before she sat down at the piano, she believed she was an amazing pianist.
Was she at one time? She just deleted that subroutine, as we see in episode 3, or was that a memory? Because like you also have these. So that's the other question. Like if you had the memory of being an Olympic level track athlete, would you be an Olympic level track athlete, assuming that you like were reasonably
disagreed?
I guess that's the truth. So it's like she has all these memories of these other clones. That's one of the reasons she's trying to interface with Emily Prime, is she wants the unvarnished, idealism of youth, to experience that again, to kind of reconnect with her sister clone that she lost in orbit of this red planet. But yeah, it's a big question of is the memory of the thing the same thing as a thing? Because just because one of her clones or original selves had the ability to do that, she doesn't have the muscle memory. Yeah. I thought that was kind of interesting.
And this adds on to the idea of not heeding the advice of the first episode, right? Living in the moment, but dwelling on the trivialities. There are scenes in here where, and this is not a new concept, plenty of things have explored this, but the idea of missing out on the moment because you're so focused on capturing the moment for the future. There's a scene in there where all the people standing around have cell phones that they're pointing, or some recording devices that they're pointing at the thing as they're experiencing it. And you get the feeling if they came back to a memory of this, their memory would be of them trying to preserve the memory for the future version of themselves, right? Instead of being in the moment and enjoying the thing as it's happening, so they can later come back to it and visit it as an actual memory of the thing, it's now one step removed and therefore diminished.
Yeah, there's also this I think at one point the clone Emily is almost in a state of panic, says I don't want to be copied anymore. But it's too late. The second your consciousness is copied, this is one of the things I spent a lot, uncomfortably long time thinking about. If you're a clone and you're tired of living and you want to take yourself out of the world, you really can't, because your intellectual property of yourself is out. It's already been duplicated. It's no longer, your continued line of existence is out of your hands, which I guess is the same thing about having, parents, but it's also different because you can, if you don't want to be a parent, you can just not be a parent, whereas if you're a clone and you're you know what, this bullshit, this crazy bullshit ends with me, it doesn't matter, because you can also have more progeny, sisters, even mothers and fathers, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. It's kind of I don't know, this terrifying realization of the future, but also does it really matter? I don't know.
Right. We talked about this in Westworld quite a bit, right? When Dolores clones herself into other copies, and puts them in other bodies. That's the big question. Were they still Dolores? And the show plays with that as well. So by cloning yourself, are you creating more yous or just more beings in general?
Well, and the other thing is what is the objective reality of the situation has nothing to do with how people perceive it, because people get in their head and existential angst about crazy shit all the time. And this is just you go to be another layer of what does anything mean? What is it especially if you've got imagine if you've got 100 clones of yourself and they've been declared legal independence, and one of them is fantastically wealthy and 70 of them are in squalor.
Yeah.
What are you? What does it mean to be one of the ones living in squalor? What does it mean to be one of the ones in the pinnacle? You're literally the same person other than your experiences. What a fucking gym job that thing is. I don't know.
How do you do IDs in a future with cloning?
Dude,
it's digital, right? It's microchip.
Yeah, it has to be. But then
but that's the thing, is and swap.
But you can always fake identity. That's one of those things where it's there's tons of problems with the credit card system. There's tons of identity theft, but not nearly as much as you'd think. It's so fucking easy to rip off credit cards and fake people's identities. It happens such a small fraction of the time. The only explanation for it is people are inherently good and don't want to do shady shit. So I'm not sure how the future of cloning adds any more bullshit to our already bullshit
I can't
system.
Visually tell you apart from someone else at that point. That's the thing that photo IDs work on, right? Is the person standing in front of me the person in this picture? And our brains are very, very good at telling that, at pattern matching that. What happens when that pattern is out there multiple times and those are distinct individuals that we now have to tell apart?
And I know that there's people are probably, well, what about identical twins and triplets? And like, sure, you're talking about a one-off situation. What if 50% of the population were identical, like genetic clones of each other?
Right.
Like it becomes like facial recognition, all that kind of stuff. Like, I don't know. I guess it could get more sophisticated because even a little clone of someone, I imagine, will start to diverge how they look within a series, you know, like you'll develop scars, facial, you know, whatever. I don't know. Maybe not.
But then how often do you have to take the patterns? Because if like the scars are what we're determining, like you get a new scar, suddenly you're not you according to our ID system. What does that mean? Yeah. Like, wow.
The other thing I thought was jaw dropping about this is there's this point where you're talking about her being this ballerina. And Don busts out some exquisite stick figure ballerina animation, like, 120 frames per second, fluid, lifelike, mo-capped stick figure goodness. And it's like everything else is so, it'd be like in the middle of a South Park episode if like the Avengers Endgame broke out, like that level of animation, like computer graphics and stuff. It's like, I don't know, it felt like a real flex, and it came off as one too.
Yeah, I like most of the animation. It's crude, it's simplistic, but it's effective.
And the end of this was like, so they introduced this concept of memory tourists that like, you know, it's like, oh, you know, we've experienced all these memories. I want to go see them for the first time. So instead of like looking, like imagine if like instead of like a picture of your honeymoon or a big your graduation, you could actually go back and as an observer look at you graduating or look at you on your honeymoon. That's what people do. And like in the past, like it starts to be annoying. Like anytime you have like a graduation or piano, it's anything, like 4 or 5 of your clones will pop up and be like, oh my, this is just like I remembered it.
Yeah. It brings up the question of whether you can ever then create those memories in the first place, right? Because as like Emily Prime says, or Emily the clone says in the first episode, something about like, here's a piece of advice that I was given, that I'm going to give you, that actually I have a memory of this moment being given this advice and I'm just regurgitating it. So I don't even know where this advice comes from or originates from. Like that's the thing with these memories. If like, let's say you sit down and have a nice dinner and that's a memory that people want to come back to. So they come back to it and they film it via time travel. Does that change the memory? Does that mean that the memory as it happened, this nice dinner, quiet dinner without anybody filming it, without anybody standing around ruining it, does that even exist anymore?
It's like the double blind slit experiment or whatever, right? The act of observing this precious moment changes the precious moment for sure.
Yeah, and in that case destroys it, right?
Yeah, that's the thing is like this show gives no fucks to thinking about its like the implications. I mean, that's not fair.
Yeah,
it spends a lot of fucks thinking about the implications of its time travel and cloning systems that it wants to think about. All the other stuff about paradoxes and stuff, it doesn't really give a fuck about.
Which is fine. I enjoyed that
because you're right. Like if you spoil that moment, then it's no like does like then like everyone wink out of existence because there was no reason to be there. And then once you do that, does the original moment happen? And then you just
right, and you're stuck in this cycle,
caught back between this vibration, quantum string stuff, bullshit. But the end of this movie ends up with this clone of Emily like merging with the consciousness of Emily Prime as a 5-year-old and finding happiness and contentment. And then her other sisters, time traveling Emily sisters, come and discover her. And be like, hey, come on, you can't live in the past. You got to come along with us, and drag her back, kicking and screaming, essentially, to adulthood. Which, that's another sad implication that, like, if ever an adult could connect to, like, authentic childhood carefreeness, we would absolutely drag them kicking and screaming back to it, or shame them, or say that you're,
tell them how
not
irresponsible it is.
Exactly. Which,
there's
a real bitch when we're
to that.
Yeah, but there's real opposition to our stated objective, which is to pile up enough shit to where we never have to worry about it, and then like guilting and shaming people and living in that condition if they are able to arrive at it, you know. So
yeah.
Anything else we want to talk about? Should we move on to the slightly less dark third chapter, The Absentee Destinations of David Prime?
Well, one of my absolute favorite lines in all three of these things is when they're talking about a man, a mystery man, I think, who like time traveled or was never seen from again. And I think that's David later on. We'll get to that in number 3. But they say he had the haircut of a man who seriously misinterpreted himself. And I don't know exactly what that means, but it is hilarious.
The illustration of this man's haircut.
And just, the illustration is really good. But that line is funny.
I also love there's so many like gags he sets up, like early on. Emily, the Emily clone cautions Emily Prime to not think of a baby dinosaur later. And at a crucial point, Emily Prime thinks of a baby dinosaur, which sends them into literally nowhere. Like it sends them into this. Oh, this actually loops in really nice with of our concept of what childhood innocence is, because from this blank state, Emily Prime creates Triangle Land, which is a stream of consciousness kid stuff, and rebuilds her reality for like just wills it back into existence, which saves them both. Only for the Emily clone to be drugged back by her friends.
Two things about that. I'm not sure what's illogical about a baby dinosaur. Like dinosaurs are babies at some point. Just like any other living thing on this planet. I
can't remember either. It's just it was incongruent in the scenario in which it appeared, and it broke the already faulty Emily clone's mental matrix. You know.
Yeah. And then Triangle Land, the triangles look so happy. Oh man,
the Triangle Land was amazing.
It looks awesome. Yeah,
it's another joyous example of animation. Yeah, and then sometimes there were circles, and that was okay. So that brings us to part 3, the absent destinations of David Prime. Now you might recall that one of the clones of Emily fell in love with this man David, who was a clone of the boy that they put in a test tube without a brain. That the whole world fell in love with, and she fell in love with, and then like at their moment of peak happiness, he collapsed of an aneurysm. Mm-hmm. This fucking movie introduces the idea of time cops that go back and fix time problems by they're able to step between this is like 6-dimensional shit. Like it's literally like, just 6-dimension beings in Interstellar. Like they can walk between, like the way they illustrate is like imagine a 35 millimeter projector film, and we're living our lives in the frames. These travelers go between the frames, the void in between the frames, and they have these guns that they can instantly cause either a heart attack or a brain aneurysm, which causes the problem person to die. It's undetected. Brain aneurysm is actually kind of chilling, because it's like everyone that you know that had a brain aneurysm was actually murdered by a time cop because they were about to cause a huge problem. There is this, I don't even know if I can do it justice. There's this insanely complex sequence of cause and effect of David Prime, his various clones, one of his clones that gets drafted as a time cop, and his jealousy of David's happiness that causes him to murder him, which then Emily cannot accept, the clone of Emily cannot accept, which she incepts this memory fragment back to one of other David's clones. And oh man, they also introduced the multiverse into this concept, where she like sends this broadcast and it's received by all Davids in all times, but only the ones that are closest to her time zone get it entirely. Is this making sense?
I'm not sure I completely understood what they were going for here, so maybe.
So imagine, so David, so the way we come into the story is David sitting like essentially in a recliner watching cartoons and eating a bowl of cereal, wearing his like virtual helmet, and he gets this transmission from Emily, and she says, "Hey, I'm your long lost love, and we found authentic happiness." And just as then, this message from the future is so large and high resolution that it's too large for David's brain to unzip. Mm-hmm. So it's like if you got a 2 gig zip file on a drive that's got 500 megs free. If you want to unzip that shit, guess what? You're going to have to delete stuff. So the whole rest of the movie, David is going through his internal hub and deleting things like concert violinist and quantum mechanics and things like that. And as he unpacks, as he deletes things, he continues to play the message and gets a little bit more. And it becomes so compelling because, in this society, everyone lives in kind of like matrix pods. You got the idea that everyone's cloned. The idea that you'd have love and fulfillment is like alien. So he's chasing it. But as he unpacks the message more and more, he's reduced to like he's deleting things like being able to walk. Mm-hmm. The last few steps of him following this puzzle is him literally crawling. He loses basic problem solving skills, which is funny because there's this great gag of him having to go through this tunnel, and the clone Emily tells him like there's these neurotoxic worms. And one drop can, like, I don't know, I forget exactly cause what, but he just deleted his problem solving routine.
Well, it makes you like scream uncontrollably and drives you mad, I think. And yeah, so the rest of the journey, he's screaming randomly. Right. It's real funny.
But that's the thing, like, he deletes his problem stuff, so all he can do is just run straight forward through this cave, and like every single worm comes out and just sprays gallons of this neurotoxin. So yeah, the rest of the episode, he's just screaming, he's crawling. And oh God, I don't even know, like, the final like resolution of this plot is a lot like that Snake episode of Rick and Morty, where there's just hundreds of Davids, like, well, not literally hundreds, but like you see like the nefarious clone of David that's going to kill him at his max moment of happiness is subverted by one of the other David Primes, which is immediately subverted by one of his copies, which is immediately subverted. And like you just go through this like chain of events, and it leads to David Prime being killed. But the happy ending is my
notes end on David's killed by his clones, who stop him from altering his past or future.
So, but then at one point, the David clone, like it reminds me of war games. Like the only solution is not to play. Mm-hmm. Like this whole thing of Emily's message was like a recording to tell him all the things he's got to do to avoid this death. But he can't ever stop that because the people that are stalking him have full control of the timeline. So how he gets out of that paradox is he time travels to the point where Emily's recording this message to him, which I thought was is a clever resolution, and it had a lot of emotional resonance because it's kind of like, love does conquer all.
Sure.
But there's a lot of, go ahead.
No, you're right. Go ahead. Sorry.
I said there's a lot of also grim, like really funny stuff. Like, I said that all Davids across all space times got this message. There's this great scene of him crawling through this wasteland, and he notices there's like a dead corpse of another David. And she's like, oh, don't be worried. These are like Davids that are like one off from your timeline, and they didn't get the complete message. And, it's like, I will help you deal with them. And the software like just blurs, just pixelates them.
Yeah.
So he just starts crawling. Like you see this like almost infinite landscape of David corpses, but they're all just kind of pixelated just so it just doesn't traumatize him how many Davids have died in this attempt. Like, and she's assuring him that, but you're the one. You're obviously the one.
Right.
The
and
fact
she
that
says
you
there'll
come this
probably only
far,
be a couple of them, and you can ignore
and you
them.
look. Yeah, they're it's like fucking the top of Mount Everest, just littered with corpses. But I don't know. There's a lot of like modern day commentary, like how full of commercials, like the fact that she couldn't afford like the deluxe time travel message. So,
and the hilarious thing is the commercials take up some of the space that he's deleting the parts of himself for.
Yep. Like the reason this message is so big is in large part because there's so many commercials crammed into it.
Right.
It's like I said, it's a nice, it's different from the other two because it's more of a conventional just love story,
Yeah, it's twistier too.
Very twisty, and it's also just spun from the stuff we already knew about the first two. It's like, oh yeah, the David clone that collapsed dead, and that one mind fragmented Emily clone that can't ever find happiness. Like whatever became of those crazy dudes. And I read a Reddit interview with him right like a year before the second one came out, where people were asking him after he released the second chapter, like, what are your plans? He's like, honestly, I don't have any. Like, I feel like I said everything I wanted to say. You know, and this feels very much like it's not about Emily anymore. It's about Emily and David, which is a big difference.
Yeah. The way I read it, and I think all three of these are saying a similar thing. You know, about like I said at the beginning, the way that Don Hertzfeldt feels a life can be well lived. And this one seems to be sort of about following other people's expectations, or maybe even your own expectations for yourself, and how that can be, you know, this worm that eats its own tail and just causes nothing but like you wasting your life.
Yeah.
In a similar way to, like, you know, chasing whatever it was they were chasing in episode 2, right? That nostalgia, that memory.
It's another profound quote. Death is not a destination, but the absence of one, which felt like pretty poignant, because it's also, it's like, you know, when you're dead, that's when you stop learning, growing, doing new things. And also, if you stop learning, growing, and doing new things, you are kind of axiomatically dead. I mean, that's a kind of a trite observation, but I thought in the context of this, it hit pretty good. Yeah. I also really enjoyed the depictions of life as a clone baby, like how different the education was, you know, how a lot of it was dealing with how you deal with the existential dread of being clones and being in these experiences. And you're just like 5-year-old Emily's are being like you get this idea that in the future, no one gets to be a child because you have your flash memories from other lifetimes already preloaded, and your schooling is dealing with that shit rather than figuring out who you're going to be as a real person. And which I think, see, I didn't do this. I watched 2 and 3 and then I took all my notes and I did a bunch of research. But I bet if I watched episode 1 and 2 with 3, like they would be a lot more rewarding. Yeah. And this is like the second or third time I've seen the first one. And I do think that every single time I watch them, I get a little bit more out of them because it's a lot. It's an experience.
Mm-hmm. There's a line in here that I really like too, in how it's dark. It's dark. But they're talking about how one of these Davids almost drowned, I think, at one point. And there's a line that says your adolescent life flashed before your eyes, humiliating you a second time, which is like, God damn, really? As you're dying, you're going to be humiliated? That's unfortunate. Because you always think of like the life flashing before your eyes as like the positive thing, right? Like, oh, look at all these beautiful things that happened to me. And that does happen to Emily, I think, in the last episode, the Emily clone. But in this one, it's a very different feeling.
Yeah, yeah. I also really like the way they visualize warp drive. Like, it was really cool and trippy and kind of next level for stick animation. And that's where the digital stuff kind of really, you know, came out and shined. And yeah, I think that's about, and like I said, it ends like just right in the middle of things. Like it ends with just David appearing beside her as she's finishing the message to record. Because there's all this, like, man, like there's so much that happens, like with this Da Vinci Code, almost like trying to the breadcrumbs of finding Emily's message, because it's stored in this robot that's, of course, corroded almost beyond repair, and he has to figure out how to fix it, and then he has to figure out all the laws of quantum mechanics to construct his own between time. Like it's
well, he has to like wait for the future where the robots are a thing that then he can have it repaired in the first place. It's
What was that book that you had me read a while back about the looping time travel stuff? It reminded me a lot of that.
Is it Recursion?
Recursion.
Yeah.
Yeah, where like he had this plan, but he had to wait for like both technology or a lot of stuff with Dark, where he had this plan fully formed from Emily, but he had to wait for the technology, the physics, the materials, everything. And he reorganized his entire life around this thing. Yeah. I think even over several lifetimes of clones too. Like this wasn't just an endeavor of the one person, and since they all inherit each other's memories, it doesn't really matter. But
And the other relation to recursion that I saw was like they don't just mention like, oh, these time cops come back and kill people. They also do fantastic things like building cities from the ground up and they just appear out of nowhere, right?
Yeah,
that felt very much like recursion. I remember that diner scene where they're sitting there looking out the window and then there's a building there.
Yeah, that was a really cool scene where there's like all these people like around like Futuretopia arriving in like a countdown 5, 4, and at 1 just a whole city appears and like and they move in. Like,
yeah, that's good.
What a civilization that would be. Anything else you want to talk about as far as?
I don't think so. They run through a bunch of funny skills. You know, you can. There's a skill to have a purpose. I don't know how it gives you that.
Some of the subroutines he deletes are funny.
Yeah. And just the catalog of things that he can buy, right? As he's looking through those, grow flowers out of your face.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, why not?
It's advanced bearding. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of like it reminded me of like an app library where it's like all the things that you've purchased versus the ones that you've got installed. I mean, this is all, this came out in 2020. So like Don knows this is like the app economy where it goes. He's probably seen, although actually he denied seeing Black Mirror because a lot of these things, a lot of the stuff that he touches on reminded me of a lot of individual Black Mirror episodes.
Yeah.
Because it's just essentially thinking about the future, how it will look, and whether that would be horrifying or not. But yeah, I'm glad that we got this commission. I appreciate Grant doing this because I was intensely involved with Don, and then I kind of lost track because he's also, stop you if this shocks you, but he doesn't have like a huge social media presence. He doesn't have like a lavish, he doesn't like publicize himself a lot. So like even though I was super into his stuff for a brief time during season 3 of Fargo, I had no idea that he had, done these 2 sequels to World of Tomorrow and some of this other stuff. So, I think all of his work is worth checking out since they're all animated shorts. It doesn't take a amount of time. Hunting it all down, like the best place to see him is Vimeo's site. You can see especially Rejected, the one where he's got these just crazy fucking commercials for bean companies and things like that. I think you can find that pretty available on YouTube. And I think it's even like maybe under his official channel. So. But that's his traditional hand-drawn stuff. And then go to his Vimeo account. We'll link that in the show notes. So you can go right to his store page. And the other thing is you can't buy these. That's the other thing. Since he's not happy with these, all you can do is rent them. Like he doesn't want any copies of these to exist once the definitive Blu-ray or whatever 4K version comes out that he's happy with. So all the stuff on Vimeo, you can only rent it. You can't purchase it. Or at least that was the case when he did his last interview. Did he change that?
That might be wrong because I think we bought the first episode. I know I rented the second 2 or the last 2, but yeah.
So maybe he got because that's the thing is he said that he was working he thought he would do this on YouTube, but YouTube didn't care, and the Vimeo people were like, oh, absolutely, we'll do custom codec work with you. We'll do custom bit rates, whatever you want, Don. We'll as long as you're happy. So maybe they got to where he had the definitive copy, but I can't wait for the Blu-ray to come out because supposedly it's got a bunch of bonus features and commentary tracks and stuff. And I cannot wait because this guy is also one of those really kind of fascinating Viggo Mortensen, kind of vaguely shaman-esque dude, but really down to earth too. Someone asked him what his influences were. And a lot of times they're oh God, this is going to be pretentious as shit. And he said Steven Spielberg. Because he's just got, he's got shots named after him. He's a master storyteller. He can master various mediums and genres. And he's just a pure creative storyteller. And I'm like, all right, yeah, that's a pretty fucking accessible, not up your ass answer.
Maybe the most accessible.
I thought he was going to bust out some obscure Korean Afro inspired anime person or whatever. That because also what his shit stick figure stuff, man.
Right.
What? Yeah. He also hates the Pop-Tart people because do you remember there was a Pop-Tart commercial campaign
Kellogg's?
that just ripped off his art style. Like they literally took like an element of his Rejected and like, hey, that's actually funny. Let's make it about Pop-Tarts. And
boy,
yeah, he was not a big fan of that.
I bet.
Hey, thanks, Grant, for having us see this. I had a really enjoyable time watching it and talking about it here with Jim. Do you happen to know what the next commission podcast is? Oh yeah, it's Win-Win. 2011 film that looked amazing. This commissioner, because he picked Hell or High Water, which we'd already done like 5 years ago. It was one of the first commissions we did, and he's like, "Oh, bonus." So he gave us two choices. Like, "Hey, buddy, it's you got to make the choice. Both these trailers look tasty." This is a Paul Giamatti wrestling film,
right?
Like high school, like he's a high school wrestling coach or something, and it looks like funny. It's like uplifting. It's got Bobby Cannavale and Amy Ryan, who you might know as Michael's sweetheart from The Office, right? That's the one he was like kind of Twitter pated with. They didn't end up getting married? Because I never made it through like the first 3 seasons of
I don't remember
Office Space.
The only Office, marriage rather. I remember is Jim and Pam.
Of course. I remember that one. I didn't even see it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think our next commission podcast is Win-Win. Thanks again to Grant for commissioning this podcast. And if you would like to find out how you can commission your own podcast, is easy. Just go to support.baldmove.com. There's an option to commission a podcast. You plunk down your cash, you name your movie. We will contact you and do the rest. So thank you once again for your support, Grant. Hope you're happy with your commission, and we'll see you on the next one.